My name is Dane, and this is my team, and we are doing a strategic analysis on Qantas. So, in Qantas's income statements for 2024 and 2025, Qantas's largest expense was definitely aircraft fuel and operating expenses, which we can see here, which make up both about a half of their total expenditures. We can see that salaries and wages and other benefits follow, as well as depreciation and amortization there. We can see if we break down the depreciation, we can see most of that is from aircraft and engines, which make up about 86% of the total PPE depreciation in 2025. And other expenses include technology costs, commissions, capacity hire, but it is evident that fluctuations in fuel and direct operating costs of the aircraft have the most significant impact on the airline's bottom line. So we have an organization, the International Air Transport Association, IATA, which use data from the World Air Transport Statistics, have likewise shown a very similar breakdown of the airline costs for airlines across the globe. They estimate fuel costs in the Asia Pacific region to be about 30% of the total cost of the airlines. And we can see that here as well in terms of what the actual costs are. Uh, they follow it by depreciation, crew salaries, and other expenses, which are here. They also think to be significant. And they also show the differences of fuel importance and how much it makes up across the different regions. There's a book, Fuel Hedging and Risk Management by Simo Dafir and Vishnu Gajala. They highlight a negative relationship between stock return and the price of crude oil, and more importantly, the development of crude oil amongst that time from 1990 to 2008. They highlight a negative relationship between the two, which really highlights the significance of fuel in the airline's cost structure. And likewise, this journal here from 2022 shows the same relationship from 2006 to 2019. So they graph the fuel expenses, the net profits, and crude oil prices. And the two main regions here to note are in 2008, there was a huge spike in the crude oil price in this navy blue line. And we can see that the commercial airlines net profits, this blue bar graph, they had negative net profits here because there's a negative relationship. And we can see this relationship pretty clearly from this period, 2014 to 2019. This big drop in crude oil prices was very good for the airlines, and they've got quite healthy net profits during that period. So a clear negative relationship, and this pattern actually continues, is still true today. This is the 2025 financial year, and we can see there's still a direct negative relationship with both an index, which tracks the whole global airlines, as well as Qantas specifically. So we can see in June this year, there was a hike in crude oil prices, possibly due to the Israel-Iran conflict. And we can see that the whole airline index had a quite a significant devaluation, and so did Qantas in that same period. So we can see a pretty clear negative correlation even in the last few months. Here, McKinsey and Company plot airline revenue and costs from the late 1950s to late 2010s. And we can see due to quite intense market competition in this industry, revenues and costs are pretty tied together. Qantas is said to sell commodity goods in highly competitive markets, here the commodity being available seats. So these falling revenues and costs in the 1960s can be attributed to advancements in jet engine technology, which offer better fuel efficiency. So we can really see how fuel is very significant as an input price. It can really drive down both the revenue and costs. And we can see in the today the internet technologies provide further price transparency and really further the competitive nature of the whole industry. But in terms of input prices affecting Qantas's overall profitability, the competitive landscape may actually result in fuel prices actually having little effect on Qantas's profitability. It is found that whilst oil prices often lead to short-term swings in return on invested capital, carriers' long-term profitability actually has little to do with fuel costs, given that fuel costs affect all players equally. Reductions in fuel or in other input costs are typically competed away, and savings are passed through to customers, reflecting an extremely high level of competitiveness in the airline sector.
What is economies of scale? Well, a business is able to achieve economies of scale either through when their costs rise slower than their production or when a business actively seeks to increase their production in order to lower costs. So this allows a business to sustain a cost advantage through the method of dispersing fixed costs. In order for a business to achieve economies of scale, it can be derived of two ways, internally or externally. So internally is when a business has conducted the change themselves to increase their production in order to lower costs. So a classic example of this includes bulk buying, while externally is a factor that is not controlled by the business, but rather affects the whole industry at times. So a good example of this is infrastructure improvement built to better support the industry, ultimately helps lower costs and therefore increases their economies of scale. So economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. So as cost and production share an inverse relationship, there are three stages of economies of scale that can be achieved through their long run average cost, graphing as a U-shape seen in the diagram below. So in this, we have the green section, which is the economies of scale. So as mentioned, this is when costs rise slower than production, and this is typically where businesses want to be sitting. And then during the orange section is constant economies of scale. So this is when costs rise at the same rate as production or output. And then finally is the red section, diseconomies of scale. This is where costs rise more quickly than production and output. An example of a market that is prone to this includes large retail brands where issues such as overhiring results in higher costs and therefore diseconomies of scale. Well, does Qantas actually achieve economies of scale? Well, effectively, yes, they do. So they're able to achieve this through standard methods of purchasing, including bulk buying both jet fuel, aircrafts, as well as airport gates. A good example of this is the Sydney T3 terminal, which is allocated exclusively to Qantas flights. And then the next stage of this is their reduced levels of marketing. So this can be undertaken as Qantas is a globally recognized brand, as according to CNN Travel, it is ranked the 14th of the top airlines in the world. So alongside this, their frequent flyer program has over 15 million members and it is the most frequent flyer program nationwide. This allows them to reduce marketing costs to reach their existing customers. Another point that also helped them is increased flying. So this helps improve economies of scale through spreading out fixed costs such as maintaining infrastructure salaries for employees, meaning they're gaining a higher production for the same amount of cost that they would be putting in otherwise. So, however, there is the most effective way that Qantas is able to achieve this. So they're able to do this through their international and domestic airline partners. So domestically, Jetstar is a subsidy of the Qantas Group. So this demonstrates that the Qantas Group has implemented a dual strategy brand, which allows for them to have two brand identities while operating under different names, but ultimately still run by the same organization. This effectively helps them cut costs domestically, as the Qantas Group is able to undertake research and development, bulk buying costs, as well as marketing and other costs, and split them amongst both brands to ultimately lower costs for both. While internationally, its alliance with and membership with One World allows Qantas to partner with other large international airlines such as Emirates and British Airways, amongst many others. So this partnership allows for them to reach a wider network of places without bearing all of the operational costs associated with running a service to these locations. Furthermore, Qantas still earns a commission from flights booked with other airlines associated with One World, allowing them to lower their per unit costs globally, while still returning a profit. However, despite these advantages, Qantas does face diseconomies of scale. So, due to Qantas's being a large company, it creates complexity in management as well as labor relations. For example, during industrial disputes or maintenance delays, costs can quickly rise and hence efficiency drops, leading to diseconomies of scale. So these issues highlight the challenge of maintaining such a large-scale business and airline. However, overall, Qantas largely benefits from economies of scale due to their dual branding strategy, global reach, and the brand power that they hold within the Australian market in particular, as these factors have outweighs their diseconomies of scale, allowing for Qantas to sustain their cost advantage, thus allowing Qantas to increase their profitability while maintaining a competitive edge in global and the Australian market.
Qantas Group holds significant market power in the Australian domestic airline industry, dominating with an oligopolistic market structure characterised by low competition, extensive strategic partnerships, and supportive regulations. In contrast, Qantas has less market power internationally, facing greater competition from foreign carriers, depending on alliances and code-sharing agreements, and more balanced regulatory conditions. The Australian domestic airline market is best described as an oligopoly, dominated by Qantas and Virgin. In the 2024 to 25 financial year, the Qantas Group accounted for approximately 60% of total domestic passengers. The only carrier competing for dominance is Virgin, accounting for 34.4%, while smaller competitors such as Rex hold less than 2% market share. Qantas's market power is also evident in its segment control. The airline commands over 80% of the corporate travel market and 54% of the small to medium enterprise traffic, whilst Jetstar is the sole low-cost carrier following the exit of Tiger Air and Bonza. Virgin's 2020 repositioning toward the mid-market segment further reduced competitive pressure, enabling Qantas to expand its hold over both business and budget markets. Consequently, Qantas has significant power in the domestic market due to limited competition. Internationally, Qantas operates in a far more competitive environment. Around 62 international airlines fly to and from Australia, with the Qantas Group holding 29.6% of total passenger carriage compared to 60% domestically. Competitors such as Singapore Airlines, Emirates, and Air New Zealand offer strong substitutes, constraining Qantas's market dominance on several routes. Domestically, Qantas's vertical integration with Jetstar enables the group to dominate across diverse customer segments based on their willingness to pay. Qantas also leverages its frequent flyer program, Australia's most popular reward program with over 17 million members, to strengthen customer loyalty and reduce price elasticity. They partner with over 200 companies, including major banks, supermarkets, petrol stations, and insurance providers. The program encourages customer loyalty and customer lock-in by offering perks, reinforcing Qantas's dominance. Internationally, Qantas relies on strategic partnerships primarily to remain competitive rather than dominant. As a member of the One World Alliance, alongside 13 other airlines such as British Airways, American Airlines, and Cathay Pacific, Qantas extends its global reach through code sharing and shared infrastructure. Its most important partnership, however, is with Emirates, with which Qantas jointly controls 52% of flights between Britain and Australia and 42% of flights between Europe and Australia. These alliances provide limited but targeted market power on specific routes, although overall they serve as a defensive function, enabling Qantas to compete globally despite stronger international rivals. Domestically, regulation and infrastructure constraints reinforce Qantas's dominance. The slot allocation system at major airports, particularly Sydney, favours incumbent airlines through historic slot provision. Qantas and Virgin retain priority access to peak time slots, effectively blocking new entrants. High cancellation rates on high-demand flights, as well as reviews by the ACCC and the Harris Review, suggest that Qantas and Virgin participate in slot hoarding. This serves as a barrier to entry, preserving the oligopolistic structure and Qantas's market power. Further, cabotage restrictions, which are a foreign airline's right to carry traffic between 2 points within a country, support the market dominance of domestic airlines within Australia by restricting foreign airlines' ability to operate on domestic routes. Domestic regulations tend to support the market dominance of major players like Qantas. Internationally, regulatory conditions are more balanced. Bilateral air service agreements restrict foreign airlines from operating at Australia's capacity-constrained major airports. This is intended to support regional airport traffic, but ultimately assist Qantas's international competitiveness by providing Australian airlines with better routes. Australia also has open skies agreements with countries such as the US, Japan, and Singapore, which promote international competition. Further, Qantas is constrained by other countries' own regulations on capacity and route restrictions. While policies enhance Qantas's access to international routes, they do not grant it substantial global dominance. Instead, regulation enables Qantas to remain competitive rather than dominate in international markets. Overall, Qantas's market power is far greater domestically than internationally. In Australia's concentrated high-barrier domestic market, Qantas leverages strategic partnerships and regulatory advantages to sustain high profitability and control capacity. In contrast, in the international market, Qantas faces intense competition and relies on alliances to remain competitive. Therefore, while low competition, regulation, and strategic partnerships reinforces Qantas's strength at home, abroad they merely enable it to compete rather than dominate in a global and highly competitive environment.
Pricing strategies are pricing schemes that aim to maximize the profits of the firm by recognizing and capitalizing on the different willingness to pay by consumers. Price discrimination is one form of a pricing strategy that is often utilized by firms. This refers to the practice of charging different prices to different consumers for the same product or service to generate more economic profits by capitalizing, again, on the different willingness to pay. To effectively discriminate within the market based on price, firms must have sufficient market power to allow them not to charge the equilibrium prices, and they have to be able to prevent the resale or arbitrage of its product on secondhand markets. As Caitlin explained earlier, Qantas currently has approximately 60% of market share domestically and 29.6% of market share internationally. The resale or arbitrage elements of Qantas's products is also quite low. Not only because of the fact that this is a service that is being provided, which makes it harder to onsell, the mechanisms in place, as outlined by Qantas's conditions of carriage, state that tickets are non-transferable between consumers. This substantial share in the aviation industry and stringent prevention of arbitrage is sufficient to allow Qantas to discriminate in terms of price within the market. For price discrimination to be profitable, the market must be able to be segmented into different consumer groups that have different price sensitivities. For Qantas, it can be difficult to identify the demands of consumers as flight demand is seasonal, geographical, and determined by other reasons. This makes segmenting in the aviation market challenging. As such, Qantas best achieves price discrimination by utilising second-degree price discrimination strategies. One second-degree price discrimination strategy that is often employed is versioning. This is where a firm offers a different version of the same underlying product or service designed to be segmented the market based on their willingness to pay. For Qantas, they offer essentially the same service to consumers, being a flight. However, they version the flight slightly in the following ways. Firstly, they version through class systems. This is where they offer slightly different service to consumers depending on their willingness to pay. For example, this flight from Sydney to Singapore. Qantas has discriminated based on where consumers would prefer to sit during this flight. Flights in economy class start from $516 for standard services provided, whereas consumers who would prefer greater luxuries during their flight, they can pay more, up to $1,705 for premium economy, and then further increases for business at $2,237. As identified by the 2024 Australian Treasury Report on the aviation industry, Qantas have effectively segmented the market and price discrimination by utilising their subsidiary company, Jetstar. They have strategized in marketing Jetstar to be a budget airline, offering basic services and therefore cheaper flights. In doing so, this has meant Qantas has been able to free up resources to contribute to the greater proportion of seats and sales to upper classes such as business and premium economy. They are therefore able to effectively price discriminate as they are offering higher end services to consumers that have a higher willingness to pay for flights. This further allows the Qantas Group as a whole to benefit from the prominent market power in both the higher end and budget spaces. Secondly, Qantas also version based on flight times. Again, take the Sydney to Melbourne flight as an example. As noted in the ACCC report, the Sydney to Melbourne route of travel is one of the most popular domestic routes. Flights early in the morning and in the evening are the most expensive because of their convenience to consumers, as these times allow them to enjoy their day in the relative destination. In contrast, flights in the middle of the day are less likely to be purchased due to the inconvenience to the consumer being in the middle of the day, and therefore those flight times are cheaper. Another common pricing strategy utilised by firms is bundling. This is where firms sell two or more products together at a single price. Mixed bundling is a sub-form of bundling that allows the firm to offer consumers a choice of what products they want in their bundle. This appeals to consumers as they can bundle their products that they are willing to pay for and are more likely to participate in bundling practices. In the case of Qantas, they use bundling as a pricing tool to upsell products to consumers by bundling flights with other holiday-related expenses. For example, Qantas offer add-ons to their flight purchases such as hotels, vehicles, and insurance. The bundling offered by Qantas is a form of mixed bundling as consumers get to choose what add-ons, if any, to their flight purchase, which appeals even more to the willingness to consume of Qantas products over others.
Qantas's Project Sunrise, which will introduce ultra-long-haul non-stop routes from Sydney and Melbourne and New York to London, highlights a revolutionary shift in Australian aviation. By cutting travel times by up to 4 hours and offering a more seamless passenger experience through redesigned cabin interiors and service enhancements informed by medical and scientific research, Qantas leads the way to redefining long-haul travel for Australians to help bring them closer to the rest of the world. Thus, despite technical issues and manufacturing delays, which has seen the project's launch date move back to 2027, the project still has a strong potential to enhance Qantas's monopoly power, which arises when a firm holds a dominant position within a market and is able to act as a price maker by restricting output and maintaining prices above marginal cost. Although the non-stop flight market requires considerable time, effort, and financial resources to bring the service into operation, Qantas's continued dominance as Australia's largest domestic and international airline, evident in the images on the screen, has provided a competitive edge that has enabled Qantas to invest substantial amounts of capital into the project to overcome the high entry barriers of non-stop flights. This can be seen in Qantas's investment in a multi-billion-dollar purchase of 12 new aircrafts and other expenses such as research to reduce the risk of prolonged travel on health outcomes of passengers. However, this costly innovation has paid off for Qantas, providing it with the opportunity to offer customers a unique service as it gains first-mover advantage to become the sole provider of non-stop flights from Sydney and Melbourne to London and New York. Furthermore, even though Qantas does not have any competition within this market, highlighting its strong potential for monopoly power, the fact that no other airlines have made any announcements to engage in these flight routes since Qantas's announcement of the project in 2017 further highlight the high barriers of entry and the sustained market power that Qantas can achieve due to the fact that it has the power and ability to exercise complete control over ticket pricing and number of flights due to the absence of competitors currently offering or planning to offer perfect substitutes. Thus, since this enables Qantas to gain monopoly power as it's the only airline offering these direct flights, it can set airfare prices above marginal cost, demonstrating its ability to act as a price maker. This can be illustrated in Figure 1, which shows that the average airfare per passenger, represented by P star, set above marginal cost, allows Qantas to capture a larger producer surplus, ensuring that it can meet and exceed its estimated profit of $400 million. Therefore, we can infer that the 20% price increase not only reflects higher expenses associated with direct flights, such as greater fuel usage and reduced passenger capacity of the aircraft, but also showcases Qantas's monopoly power by its ability to set prices higher than marginal revenue equaling marginal cost to ensure that it can achieve profit maximization. Moreover, the growing demand for non-stop flights and the success of Qantas's direct flight from Perth to London reinforces how changing consumer preferences have shifted non-stop flights as a product with inelastic demand, highlighting consumers' strong willingness to pay premium prices for the convenience and time saving provided by avoiding stopovers. In contrast, its potential for monopoly power may be restricted due to alternative one-stop flight options offered by rival airlines which include but are not limited to Air New Zealand, Singapore, and even Qantas itself, which remain relatively close substitutes, particularly for budget and health-conscious individuals. As a result, these groups may exhibit high price elasticity of demand for direct flights, meaning that high airfare prices for these flights could lead to a significant reduction in quantity demanded, constraining Qantas's ability to set prices significantly above those of one-stop alternatives to ensure that they can still capture as many potential customers and fill all seats on direct flights. Furthermore, Qantas's monopoly power may be further diminished in the longer run, especially as airlines start to recognise the potential for substantial profit opportunities on these routes, as seen in the diagram on the left, encouraging new entrants to be attracted into the market. While many airlines may not require to invest in ultra-long-haul routes due to their geographic location, there is still a potential for airlines to have the capacity to replicate Qantas's direct flight routes from Project Sunrise. Although entry can take considerable time, nevertheless, if new entrants were to enter this market, Qantas's demand curve would become flatter, e.g. more elastic, and profit would shrink, as seen in the diagram on the right, since demand becomes distributed across both firms, resulting in Qantas having to sell airfares at lower prices and supply less of these flights compared to before to compete with competitors. Additionally, as many companies seek to enter the market to take advantage of these profit opportunities, it will eventually become zero in the longer term as the demand curve becomes tangent to the average total cost curve, highlighting the vast array of flight options that are now available to consumers, which has the capacity to fully diminish Qantas's monopoly power
potentially requiring them to engage in collusions and cartels to ensure they can continue to make a profit from these routes. Although it's worth highlighting that Qantas's strong brand reputation, evident in its prioritization of passenger safety, ranking as the world's second safest airline in 2025, may enable it to maintain some monopoly power still, since consumers will be willing to pay greater for safety on flights over airlines who do not have this advantage. However, due to the nature of the product, the extended launch period, and the absence of other airlines currently planning to upgrade their aircraft to fly over 20 hours has allowed Qantas's upcoming implementation of Project Sunrise to have the potential to achieve monopoly power in its upcoming direct ultra-long-haul routes from Sydney and Melbourne to New York and London.